25. I strike at the Jolly Roger. I had scarce gained a position on the bowsprit when the flying jib flapped and filled upon the other deck. With a report like a gun, the schooner trembled to her keel under the reverse, but next moment, the other sails still drawing, the jib flapped back again and hung idle. This had nearly tossed me off into the sea, and now I lost no time, crawled back along the bowsprit, and fumbled head foremost on deck. I was on the lee side of the forecastle, and the mainsail, which was still drawing, concealed from me a certain portion of the afterdeck. Not a soul was to be seen. The planks, which had not been swabbed since the mutiny, bore the prints of many feet, and an empty bottle, broken by the neck, tumbled to and fro like a living thing in the scuppers. Suddenly, the Hispaniola came right into the wind. The jibs behind me cracked aloud. The rudder slammed to. The whole ship gave a sickening heave and shudder, and at the same moment the main boom swung inboard, the sheet groaning in the blocks, and showed me the lee afterdeck. There were 2 watchmen, sure enough, red cap on his back, as stiff as a handspike, with his arms stretched out like those of a crucifix, and his teeth showing through his open lips. His real hands propped against the bulwarks, his chin on his chest, his hands lying open before him on the deck, his face as white under its tan as a tallow candle. For a while the ship kept bucking and sidling like a vicious horse, the sails filling now on one deck, now on another, and the boom swinging to and fro till the mast groaned aloud under the strain. Now and again, too, there would be a cloud of light sprays over the bulwark and a heavy blow of the ship's bows against the swell. So much heavier weather was made of it by this great rigged ship than by my homemade lopsided coracle, now gone to the bottom of the sea. At every jump of the schooner, Redcap slipped to and fro. But what was ghastly to behold, neither his attitude nor his fixed, teeth-disclosing grin was any way disturbed by this rough usage. At every jump, too, Mr. Hands appeared still more to sink into himself and settle down upon the deck, his feet sliding ever the farther out, and the whole body canting towards the stern, so that his face became little by little hid from me, and at last I could see nothing beyond his ear and a frayed ringlet of one whisker. At the same time I observed around them splashes of dark blood upon the planks, and began to feel sure that they had killed each other in their drunken wrath. While I was thus looking and wondering, in a calm moment, when the ship was still, Israel Hands turned partly round, and with a low moan writhed himself back to the position in which I had seen him first. The moan, which told of pain and deadly weakness, and the way in which his jaw hung open, went right to my heart. But when I remembered the talk I had overheard from the apple barrel, all pity left me. I walked aft until I reached the mainmast. "Come aboard, Mr. Hans," I said ironically. He rolled his eyes round heavily, but he was too far gone to express surprise. All he could do was to utter one word: "Brandy." It occurred to me there was no time to lose, and dodging the boom as it once more lurched across the deck, I slipped aft and down the companion stairs into the cabin. It was such a scene of confusion as you can hardly fancy. All the lock-fast places had been broken open in quest of the chart. The floor was thick with mud, where ruffians had sat down to drink or consult after wading in the marshes round their camp. The bulkheads, all painted in clear white and beaded round with gilt, bore a pattern of dirty hands. Dozens of empty bottles clinked together in corners to the rolling of the ship. One of the doctor's medical books lay open on the table, half of the leaves gutted out, I suppose, for pipe lights. In the midst of all this, the lamp still cast a smoky glow, obscure and brown as umber. I went into the cellar. All the barrels were gone, and of the bottles, a most surprising number had been drunk out and thrown away. Certainly, since the mutiny began, not a man of them could ever have been sober. Foraging around, I found a bottle with some brandy left for Hans, and for myself I routed out some biscuit, some pickled fruits, a great bunch of raisins, and a piece of cheese. With these I came on deck, put down my own stock behind the rudderhead, and well out of the coxswain's reach, went forward to the water breaker and had a good deep drink of water, and then, and not till then, gave Mr. Hans the brandy. He must have drunk a gill before he took the bottle from his mouth. "Aye," said he. "Why, thunder, but I wanted some of that." I sat down, already in my own corner, and begun to eat. "Much hurt?" I asked him. He grunted, or rather I might say he barked. "If that doctor was aboard," he said, "I'd be right enough in a couple of turns, but I don't have no manner of luck, you see, and that's what's the matter with me. As for that swab, he's as good as dead, he is." Hans added, indicating the men with the red cap. "He weren't no seaman anyhow. And where might you have come from?" "Well," said I, "I've come aboard to take possession of this ship, Mr. Hans, and you'll please regard me as your captain until further notice." He looked at me sourly enough, but said nothing. Some of the color had come back into his cheeks, though he still looked very sick and still continued to slip out and settle down as the ship banged about. "By the by," I continued, "I can't have these colors, Mr. Hans, and by your leave I'll strike 'em. Better none than these." And again, dodging the boom, I ran to the color lines, handed down their cursed black flag, and jumped it overboard. "God save the Queen," said I, waving my cap, "and there's an end to Captain Silver." Mr. Hands watched me keenly and slyly, his chin all the while on his breast. "I reckon," he said at last, "I reckon, Captain Hawkins, you'll kind of want to get ashore now. Suppose we talks?" "Why, yes," says I. "With all my heart, Mr. Hands, say on." And I went back to my meal with a good appetite. "This man," he began, knocking feebly at the corpse. "O'Brien were his name, a rank Irelander. This man had made got the canvas on her, meaning for to sail her back. Well, he's dead now, he is, as dead as Blige, and who's to sail this ship I don't see. Without I gives you a hint, you ain't that man, as far as I can tell. Now, look here, you give me food and drink, and a old scarf or handkerchief to tie my wound up, you do, and I'll tell you how to sail her. And that's about square all around, I take it." "I'll tell you one thing," says I. "I'm not going back to Captain Kidd's anchorage. I mean to get into North Inlet and put her quietly there." "To be sure you did," he cried. "Why, I ain't such an infernal lubber after all. I can see, can't I? I've tried my fling, I have, and I've lost. And it's you who has the wind of me. North Inlet, why, I haven't no choice, not I. I'd help you sail her up to Execution Dock, by thunder. So I would." Well, as it seemed to me, there was some sense in this. We struck our bargain on the spot. In 3 minutes I had the Hispaniola sailing easily before the wind along the coast of Treasure Island, with good hopes of returning to Northern Point ere noon and beating down again as far as North Inlet before high water, when we might beach her safely and wait till the subsiding tide permitted us to land. Then I lashed the tiller and went below to my own chest, where I got a soft silk handkerchief of my mother's. With this, and with my aid, Hands bound up the great bleeding stab he had received in the thigh, and after he had eaten a little and had a swallow or two more of the brandy, he began to pick up visibly, sat straighter up, spoke louder and clearer, and looked in every way another man. The breeze served us admirably. We skimmed before it like a bird, the ghost of the island flashing by, and the view changing every minute. Soon we were past the high lands and bowling beside low, sandy country, sparsely dotted with dwarf pines, and soon we were beyond that again and had turned the corner of the rocky hill that ends the island on the north. I was greatly elated with my new command, and pleased with the bright, sunshiny weather and these different prospects of the coast. I had now plenty of water and good things to eat, and my conscience, which had smitten me hard for my desertion, was quieted by the great conquest I had made. I should, I think, have had nothing left me to desire but for the eyes of the coxswain, as they followed me derisively about the deck, and the odd smile that appeared continually on his face. It was a smile that had in it something both of pain and weakness, a haggard old man's smile, but there was, besides that, a grain of derision, a shadow of treachery, in his expression as he craftily watched and watched and watched me at my work. Chapter 26. Israel Hands. The wind, serving us to a desire, now hauled into the west. We could run so much the easier from the northeast corner of the island to the mouth of the North Inlet, only as we had no power to anchor and dared not beach her till the tide had flowed a good deal farther. Time hung on our hands. The coxswain told me how to lay the ship to. After a good many trials I succeeded, and we both sat in silence over another meal. "Captain," said he at length, with that same uncomfortable smile, "here's my old shipmate O'Brien. Suppose you was to heave him overboard. I ain't particular as a rule, and I don't take no blame for settling his hash, but I don't reckon him ornamental now, do ya?" "I'm not strong enough, and I don't like the job, and there he lies for me," said I. "This here's an unlucky ship, this Hispaniola, Jim," he went on, blinking. "There's a power of men been killed in this Hispaniola. A sight o' poor seamen dead and gone since you and me took ship to Bristol. I never seen such dirty luck, not I. There was this here O'Brien. Now he's dead, ain't he? Well, now, I'm no scholar, and you're a lad as can read and figure, and to put it straight, do you take it as a dead man is dead for good, or do he come alive again?" "You can kill the body, Mr. Hands, but not the spirit. You must already know that," I replied. "O'Brien there is in another world and may be watching us." "Ah," says he, "well, that's unfortunate. Appears as if killing parties was a waste of time. Howsoever, spurs don't reckon for much, but what I've seen, I'll chance it with the spurs, Jim. And now you've spoke up free, and I'll take it kind if you step down into that there cabin and give me shivery timbers, I can't hit the name of it. Well, you get me a bottle of wine, Jim. This here brandy's too strong for my head." Now, the coxswain's hesitation seemed to be unnatural, and as for the notion of his preferring wine to brandy, I entirely disbelieved it. The whole story was a pretext. He wanted me to leave the deck. So much was plain, but with what purpose I could in no way imagine. His eyes never met mine. They kept wandering to and fro, up and down, now with a look to the sky, now with a flitting glance upon the dead O'Brien. All the time he kept smiling and putting his tongue out in the most guilty, embarrassed manner, so that a child could have told that he was bent on some deception. I was prompt with my answer, however, for I saw where my advantage lay, and that with a fellow so densely stupid I could easily conceal my suspicions to the end. "Some wine," I said. "Far better. Will you have white or red?" "Well, I reckon it's about the blessed same to me, that shipmate," he replied. "So it's strong, and plenty of it. What's the odds?" "All right," I answered. "I'll bring you one, Mr. Hands, but I'll have to dig for it." With that, I scuttled down the companion with all the noise I could, slipped off my shoes, ran quietly along the sparred galley, mounted the forecastle ladder, and popped my head out of the fore companion. I knew he would not expect to see me there, yet I took every precaution possible, and certainly the worst of my suspicions proved to be too true. He had risen from his position to his hands and knees, and though his leg obviously hurt him pretty sharply when he moved, for I could hear him stifle a groan, yet it was at a good rattling rate that he trailed himself across the deck. In half a minute he had reached the port scuppers and picked out of a coil of rope a long knife, or rather a short dirk, discolored to the hilt with blood. He took it upon it for a moment, thrusting forth under his jaw, tried the point upon his hand, and then, hastily concealing it in the bosom of his jacket, trundled back again into his old place against the bulwark. This was all that I required to know. Israel could move about. He was now armed, and if he had been at so much trouble to get rid of me, it was plain that I was meant to be the victim. What he would do afterwards, whether he would try to crawl right across the island from North Inland to the camp among the swamps, or whether he would fire Long Tom, trusting that his own comrades might come first to help him, was, of course, more than I could say. Yet I felt sure that I could trust him in one point, since in that our interests jumped together, and that was in the disposition of the schooner. We both desired to have her stranded safe enough in a sheltered place, and so that, when the time came, she could be off again with a little labor and danger as might be. And until that was done, I considered that my life would certainly be spared. While I was thus turning the business over in my mind, I had not been idle with my body. I had stolen back to the cabin, slipped once more into my shoes, and laid my hand at random on a bottle of wine, and now, with this for an excuse, I made my reappearance on the deck. Mr. Hans lay as I had left him, all fallen together in a bundle, and with his eyelids lowered as though he were too weak to bear the light. He looked up, however, at my coming, knocked the neck off the bottle like a man who had done the same thing often, and took a good swig with his favorite toast of "Here's luck." Then he lay quiet for a little, and then, pulling out a stick of tobacco, begged me to cut him a quid. "Cut me a chunk of that," says he, "for I haven't no knife, and hardly strength enough, so be as I did. Ah, Jim, I reckon I've missed stays. Cut me a quid, as'll likely be the last, lad, for I'm from my long home, and no mistake." "Well," says I, "I'll cut you some tobacco, but if I was you, and I thought myself so badly, I would go to my prayers like a Christian man." "Why?" he said. "Now you tell me why." "Why?" I cried. "You were asking me just now about the dead. You've broken your trust. You've lived in sin and lies and blood. There's a man you killed lying at your feet this moment, and you ask me why. For God's mercy, Mr. Hans, that's why." I spoke with a little heat, thinking of the bloody dirk he had hidden in his pocket and designed in his ill thoughts to end me with. He, for his part, took a great draught of the wine and spoke with the most unusual solemnity. "For 30 years, he said, "I've sailed the seas and seen good and bad, better and worse, fair weather and foul, provisions running out, lines going, and what not. Well, now I tell you, I'd never seen good come of goodness yet. Him as strikes first is my fancy, that men don't bite, them's my views. Amen, so be it. And now, you look here," he added, suddenly changing his tone, "we've had about enough of this foolery. The tide's made good enough by now. You just take my orders, Captain Hawkins, and we'll sail snap in and be done with it." All told, we had scarce 2 miles to run. But the navigation was delicate. The entrance to this northern anchorage was not only narrow and shoal, but lay east and west, so that the schooner must be nicely handled to be got in. I think I was good, prompt subaltern, and I am very sure that Mr. Hans was an excellent pilot, for we went about and dodged in, shaving the banks with a certainty and a neatness that were a pleasure to behold. Scarcely had we passed the heads before the land closed around us. The shores of northern England were as thickly wooded as those of the southern anchorage, but the space was longer and narrower, and more like what in truth it was, the estuary of a river. Right before us, at the southern end, we saw the wreck of a ship in the last stages of dilapidation. It had been a great vessel of 3 masts, but had lain so long exposed to the injuries of the weather that it was hung about with great webs of drooping seaweed, and on the deck of it short bushes had taken root and now flourished thick with flowers. It was a sad sight, but it showed us that the anchorage was calm. "Now," said Mr. Hans, "look in there. There's a pet bit for the beach, the ship in. Fine, flat sand, never a cat's paw. Trees all of it. And flowers blowing like a garden on that old ship." And one speech I inquired, "How shall we get her off again?" "Why so," he replied. "You take a line ashore there on the other side at low water, take a turn about one of them big pines, bring it back, take a turn around the capstan, and lie to for the tide. Come high water, all hands take a pull upon the line, and off she comes as sweet on nature. And now, boy, you stand by. We're near the bit now, and she's too much way on her. Starboard a little, so steady, starboard, labor a little, steady, steady." So he issued his commands, which I breathlessly obeyed, till all of a sudden he cried, "Now, my hearty luff!" and I put the helm hard up, and the Hispaniola swung round rapidly and ran stem on for the low wooden shore. The excitement of these last maneuvers had somehow somewhat interfered with the watch I had kept hitherto, sharply enough, on the coxswain. Even then I was still so much interested, waiting for the ship to touch, that I had quite forgotten the barrel that hung over my head and stood craning over the starboard bulwarks and watching the ripples spreading wide before the bows. I might have fallen without a struggle for my life, had not been a sudden disquietude seized upon me that made me turn my head. Perhaps I had heard a creak or seen a shadow moving on the tail of my eye. Perhaps it was an instinct like a cat's, but sure enough, when I looked around, there was Mr. Hans, already halfway towards me with the dirk in his right hand. We must both have cried out aloud when our eyes met, but while mine was the shrill cry of terror, his was a roar of fury like a charging bully's. At the same instant he threw himself forward, and I leapt sideways towards the bows. As I did so, I let go of the tiller, which sprang sharply to leeward, and I think this saved my life, for it struck Mr. Hans across the chest and stopped him for the moment. Before he could recover, I was safe out of the corner where he had me trapped, with all the deck to dodge about. Just forward of the mainmast I stopped, drew a pistol from my pocket, took a cool aim, though he had already turned and was once more coming directly after me, and drew the trigger. The hammer fell, but there followed neither flash nor sound. The priming was useless with the sea water. I cursed myself for my neglect. Why had I not, long before, reprimed and reloaded my only weapons? Then I should not have been as now, the mere fleeing sheep before this butcher. Wounded as he was, it was wonderful how fast he could move, and his grizzled hair tumbling over his face, and his face itself as red as a red ensign with his haste and fury. I had no time to try my other pistol, nor indeed much inclination, for I was sure it would be useless. One thing I saw plainly, I must not simply retreat before him, or he would speedily hold me boxed into the bows, as a moment since he had so nearly boxed me in the stern. Once so caught, and 9 or 10 inches of the blood-stained dirk would be my last experience on this side of eternity. I placed my palms against the mainmast, which was of a goodish bigness, and weighted every nerve upon the stretch. Seeing that I meant to dodge, he also paused, and a moment or two passed in feints on his part and corresponding movements upon mine. It was such a game as I had often played at home about the rocks of Black Hill Cove, but never before, you may be sure, with such a wildly beating heart as now. Still, as I say, it was a boy's game, and I thought I could hold my own at it against an elderly seaman, with a wounded thigh. Indeed, my courage had begun to rise so high that I allowed myself a few darting thoughts on what would be the end of the affair, and while I saw certainly that I could spin it out for long, I saw no hope of any ultimate escape. Well, while things stood thus, suddenly the Hispaniola struck, staggered, ground for an instant in the sand, and then, swift as a blow, canted over to the port side till the deck stood at an angle of 45 degrees, and about a punch-in of water splashed into the scupper holes, and lay in a pool between the deck and bulwark. We were both of us capsized in a minute, and both of us rolled almost together into the scuppers. The dead Redcap, with his arms still spread out, tumbling stiffly after us. So near we were, indeed, that my hand came against the coxswain's boot with a crack that made my teeth rattle. Blow and all, I was the first afoot again, for Mr. Hans had gotten involved with the dead body. The sudden canting of the ship had made the deck no place for running on. I had to find some new way of escape, and that upon the instant, for my foe was almost touching me. Quick as a thought, I sprang into the misened shrouds, rattled up hand over hand, and did not draw a breath till I was seated on the cross trees. I had been saved by being prompt. The dirk had struck not half a foot below me as I pursued my upward flight, and there stood Israel Hans, with his mouth open and his face upturned to mine, a perfect statue of surprise and disappointment. Now that I had a moment to myself, I lost no time in changing the priming of my pistol, and then, having one ready for service, and to make assurance double sure, I proceeded to draw the load of the other and recharge it afresh from the beginning. My new employment struck Mr. Hans off the heap. He began to see the dice going against him, and after an obvious hesitation, he also hauled himself heavily into the shrouds, with the dirk in his teeth, began slowly and painfully to mount. It cost him no end of time and groans to haul in his wounded leg behind him, and I had quietly finished my arrangements before he was much more than a third of the way up. Then, With a pistol in either hand, I addressed him. Sorry, just a moment. Then, with a pistol in either hand, I addressed him. One more step, Mr. Hands, said I, and I'll blow your brains out. Dead men don't bite, you know, I added with a chuckle. He stopped instantly. I could see by the working of his face that he was trying to think, and the process was so slow and laborious that, in my newfound security, I laughed aloud. At last, with a swallow or two, he spoke, his face still wearing the same expression of extreme perplexity. In order to speak, he had to take the dagger from his mouth, but in all else he remained unmoved. Jim, says he, I reckon we're fouled, you and me. We'll have to sign articles. I'd have had you, but for that there larch. But I don't have no luck, not I, and I reckon I'll have to strike, which comes hard, you say, for a master mariner, to a ship's younker like you, Jim. I was drinking in his words and smiling away, as conceited as a rooster upon a wall, when, all in a breath, back he went, his right hand over his shoulder. Something sank, like an arrow through the air. I felt a blow and then a sharp bang, and there I was, pinned by the shoulder to the mast, in a horrid pain. In surprise of the moment, I scarce can say it was by my own volition, and I am sure it was without a conscious aim. Both my pistols went off, and both escaped out of my hands. They did not fall alone. With a choked cry, the coxswain loosened his grasp upon the shrouds, then plunged headfirst into the water. Chapter 27. Pieces of 8. Owing to the cant of the vessel, the masts hung far out over the water, and from my perch on the cross trees I had nothing below me but the surface of the bay. Mr. Hands, who was not so far up, was in consequence nearer to the ship, and fell between me and the bulwarks. He rose once to the surface in a lather of foam and blood, and then sank again for good. As the water settled, I could see him lying huddled together on the clean, bright sand, in the shadow of the vessel's sides. A fish or two whipped past his body. Sometimes, by the quivering of the water, he appeared to move a little, as if he were trying to rise. But he was dead enough for all that, being both shot and drowned, and was food for fish in the very place where he had designed my slaughter. I was no sooner certain of this than I began to feel a sick, fainted, and terrified. The hot blood was running over my back and chest. The dirk, where it had pinned my shoulder to the mast, seemed to burn like a hot iron. Yet it was not so much these real sufferings that distressed me, for these, it seemed to me, I could bear without a murmur. It was the horror I had upon my mind of falling from the cross trees into that still green water, besides the body of the coxswain. I clung with both hands till my nails ached, and I shut my eyes as if to cover up the peril. Gradually my mind came back again, my pulses quieted down to a more natural time, and I was once more in possession of myself. It was my first thought to pluck forth the dirk, but either it stuck too hard or my nerve failed me, and I desisted with a violent shudder. Oddly enough, that very shudder did the business. The knife, in fact, had come to the nearest in the world to missing me altogether. It held me by a mere pinch of skin, and this the shudder tore away. The blood ran down the faster, to be sure, but I was my own master again, and only tacked to the mast by my coat and shirt. These last I broke through a sudden jerk, and then regained the deck by the starboard shrouds. For nothing in the world would I have again ventured, shaken as I was, upon the overhanging port shrouds from which Israel had so lately fallen. I went below and did what I could for my wound. It pained me a good deal and still bled freely, but it was neither deep nor dangerous, nor did it greatly gall me when I used my arm. Hang on a sec, I think the music went quiet. Then I looked around me, and as the ship was now, in a sense, my own, I began to think of clearing it from its last passenger, the dead man, O'Brien. He had pitched, as I have said, against the bulwarks, where he lay like some horrible, ungainly sort of puppet, life-sized, indeed, but how differently from life's color or life's comeliness. In that position, I could easily have my way with him, and as the habit of tragical adventures had worn off almost all my terror for the dead, I took him by the waist as if he had been a sack of bran, and with one good heave tumbled him overboard. He went in with a sounding plunge. The red cap came off and remained floating on the surface, and as soon as the splash subsided, I could see him and Israel lying side by side, both wavering with the tremulous movement of the water. O'Brien, though still quite a young man, was very bald. There he lay with that bald head across the knee of the man who had killed him, and the quick fishes steering to and fro over both. I was now alone upon the ship. The tide had just turned. The sun was within so few degrees of setting that already the shadow of the pines upon the western shore began to reach right across the anchorage and fall in patterns on the deck. The evening breeze had sprung up, and though it was well warded off by the hill, with the two peaks upon the east, the cordage had begun to sing a little softly to itself, and the idle sails to rattle to and fro. I began to see the danger to the ship. The jibs I speedily doused and brought tumbling to the deck, but the mainsail was a harder matter. Of course, when the schooner canted over, the boom had swung outboard, and the cap of it and a foot or two of sail hung even under water. I thought this made it still more dangerous, yet the strain was so heavy that I half feared to meddle. At last I got my knife and cut the haylards. The peak dropped instantly. A great belly of loose canvas floated broad upon the water, and since, pull as I liked, I could not bulge the downhaul, that was the extent of what I could accomplish. For the rest, the Hispaniola must trust to luck like myself. By this time, the whole anchorage had fallen into shadow. The last rays, I remember, falling through a glade of the wood and shining bright as jewels on the flowery mantle of the wreck. It began to be chill. The tide was rapidly fleeting seaward, the schooner settling more and more on her beam ends. I scrambled forward and looked over. It seemed shallow enough, and holding the cut hawser in both hands for the last security, I let myself drop softly overboard. The water scarcely reached my waist. The sand was firm and covered with ripple marks, and I waded ashore in great spirits, leaving the Hispaniola on her side, with her mainsail trailing wide upon the surface of the bay. About the same time, the sun went fairly down, and the breeze whistled low in the dusk among the tossing pines. At least, and at last, I was off the sea, nor had I returned to thence empty-handed. There lay the schooner, clear at last from buccaneers, and ready for her own men to board and get to sea again. I had nothing nearer my fancy than to get home to the stockade and boast of my achievements. Possibly I might be blamed a bit for my truancy, but the recapture of the Hispaniola was a clinching answer, and I hoped that even Captain Smollett would confess I had not lost my time. So thinking and in famous spirits, I began to set my face homeward for the blockhouse and my companions. I remembered that the most easterly of the rivers which drained into Captain Kidd's anchorage ran from the two-peaked hill upon my left, and I bent my course in that direction, that I might pass the stream while it was so small. The wood was pretty open, and keeping along the lower spurs, I had soon turned the corner of that hill, and not long after waded to the mid-calf across the watercourse. This brought me near to where I had encountered Benjamin Gunn the Maroon, and I walked more circumspectly, keeping an eye on every side. The dusk had come nigh hand completely, and as I opened out the cleft between the two peaks, I became aware of a wavering glow against the sky, where, as I judged, the man of the island was cooking his supper before a roaring fire. And yet I wondered in my heart that he should show himself so careless, for if I could see this radiance, might it not reach the eyes of Silver himself, where he camped upon the shore among the marshes? Gradually the night fell blacker. It was all I could do to guide myself, even roughly, towards my destination. The double hill behind me and the spyglass on my right hand loomed faint and fainter. The stars were few and pale, and in the low ground where I wandered I kept tripping among bushes and rolling into sandy pits. Suddenly a kind of brightness fell about me. I looked up. A pale glimmer of moonbeams had alighted on the summit of the spyglass, and soon after I saw something broad and silvery moving low down behind the trees, and knew that the moon had risen. With this to help me, I passed rapidly over what remained to me of my journey, and sometimes walking, sometimes running, impatiently drew near to the stockade. Yet, as I began to thread the grove that lies before it, I was not so thoughtless but that I slacked my pace and went a trifle warily. It would have been a poor end of my adventures to get shot down by my own party in mistake. The moon was climbing higher and higher. Its light began to fall here and there in masses through the more open districts of the wood. And right in front of me, the glow of a different color appeared among the trees. It was red and hot, and now and again it was a little darkened, as it were the embers of a bonfire smoldering. For the life of me I could not think what it might be. At last I came right down upon the borders of the clearing. The western end was already steeped in moonshine, and the blockhouse itself still lay in a black shadow checkered with long silvery streaks of light. On the other side of the house, an immense fire had burned itself into clear embers and shed a steady red reverberation, contrasted strongly with the mellow paleness of the moon. There was not a soul stirring, nor a sound beside the noises of the breeze. Just a moment, please. Good catch. Thank you. I just noticed that you caught it at the same time that I did. I stopped with much wonder in my heart, and perhaps a little terror also. It had not been our way to build great fires. We were, indeed, by the captain's orders, somewhat niggardly of firewood, and I began to fear that something had gone wrong while I was absent. I stole round by the eastern end and keeping close in shadow, and at a convenient place where the darkness was thickest, crossed the palisade. To make assurance surer, I got upon my hands and knees and crawled without a sound towards the corner of the house As I drew nearer, my heart was suddenly and greatly lightened. It is not a pleasant noise itself, and I have often complained of it at other times, but just then it was like music to my ears. It was like music to hear my friends snoring together so loud and peaceful in their sleep. The sea cry of the watch, that beautiful all's well, never fell more reassuringly on my ear. No, it's not delayed, I just wasn't paying attention, thank you. I'm sorry. In the meantime, there was no doubt of one thing. They kept an infamous bad watch. If it had been Silver and his lads that were now creeping in on them, not a soul would have seen daybreak. That was what it was, I thought, to have the captain wounded, and again I blamed myself sharply for leaving them in that danger with so few to mount guard. By this time I had got to the door and stood up. All was dark within, so that I could distinguish nothing by the eye. As for sounds, there was the steady drone of the snorers, and a small occasional noise, a flickering or pecking that I could in no way account for. With my arms before me, I walked steadily in. I should lie down in my own place, I thought with a silent chuckle, and enjoy their faces when they found me in the morning. My foot struck something yielding. It was a sleeper's leg, and he turned and groaned, but without waking. And then, all of a sudden, a shrill voice broke forth out of the darkness. "Pieces of eight, pieces of eight, pieces of eight, pieces of eight," and so forth, without pause or change, like the clacking of a tiny mill. Silver's green parrot, Captain Flint. It was she whom I had heard pecking at a piece of bark. It was she keeping better watch than any human being, who thus announced my arrival with her wearisome refrain. I had no time left me to recover. At the sharp, clipping tone of the parrot, the sleepers awoke and sprang up, and with a mighty oath, the voice of Silver cried, "Who goes?" I turned to run, struck violently against one person, recoiled, and ran full into the arms of a second, who for his part closed upon and held me tight. "Bring a torch, Dick," said Silver, when my capture was thus assured, and one of the men left the log house and presently returned with a lighted brand. Part 6. Captain Silver. Chapter 28. In the enemy's camp. The red glare of the torch, lighting up the interior of the blockhouse, showed me the worst of my apprehensions realized. The pirates were in possession of the house and stores. There was the cask of cognac, there were the pork and bread, as before, and what tenfold increased my horror, not a sign of any prisoner. I could only judge that all had perished, and my heart smote me sorely that I had not been there to perish with them. There were 6 of the buccaneers, all told. Not another man was left alive. 5 of them were on their feet, flushed and swollen, suddenly called out of the first sleep of drunkenness. The 6th had only risen upon his elbow. He was deadly pale, and the blood-stained bandage round his head told that he had recently been wounded, and still more recently dressed. I remembered the man who had been shot, and had run back among the woods in the great attack, and doubted not that this was he. The parrot sat preening her plumage on Long John's shoulder. He himself, I thought, looked somewhat paler and more stern than I was used to. He still wore the fine broadcloth suit in which he had fulfilled his mission, but it was bitterly the worse for wear, daubed with clay and torn with the sharp briars of the wood. "So," said he, "here's Jim Hawkins, shiver me timbers, dropped in like welcome, I take that friendly." And thereupon he sat down across the brandy cask and began to fill the pipe. "Give me a loan of the link, Dick," said he, and then when he had a good light, "That'll do, lad," he added. "Stick the glim in the wood heap, and you, gentlemen, bring yourselves to. You needn't stand up for Mr. Hawkins. He'll excuse you, you may lay to that." And so, Jim, stopping the tobacco, here you were, and quite a pleasant surprise. Poor old John. I see you were smart when first I set my eyes on you, but this here gets away from me clean it do. To all this, as may be well supposed, I made no answer. They had set me with my back against the wall, and I stood there looking Silver in the face, pluckily enough, I hope, to all outward appearance, but with black despair in my heart. Silver took a whiff or two of his pipe with great composure, and then ran on again. "Now, you see, Jim, so be as you are here," says he. "I'll give you a piece of my mind. I've always liked you, I have, for a lad of spirit, and the picture of my own self when I was young and handsome. I always wanted you to shine and take your share, and die a gentleman, and now my cock you've got to. Captain Smollett's as fine seaman as I'll owe up to any day, but stiff on discipline. Duty's duty, says he, and right he is. Just you keep clear of the captain. The doctor himself is gone dead again you. Ungrateful scamp was what he said, and the short and long of the whole story is about here. You can't go back on your own lot, for they won't have you, and without you start a third ship's company all by yourself, which might be lonely. You'll have to join with Captain Silver." So far, so good. My friends then were still alive, and though I partly believed the truth of Silver's statement that the cabin party were incensed at me for my desertion, I was more relieved than distressed by what I heard. "I don't say nothing as to your being in our hands," continued Silver, "though there you are, and you may lay to it. I'm all for arguments. I never seen good come out of threatening. If you like the service, well, you will join, and if you don't, Jim, why, you're free to answer no. Free and welcome, shipmate, and if fair can be said by mortal seamen, shiver me sides." "Am I to answer, then?" I asked with a very tremulous voice. Though all this sneering talk, I was made to feel the threat of death that overhung me, and my cheeks burned and my heart beat painfully in my breast. "Lad," said Silver, "no one's pressing of you. Take your bearings. None of us won't hurry you, mate. Time goes so pleasant in your company, you see." "Well," says I, growing a bit bolder, "if I'm to choose particular, I have a right to know what's what, and why you're here, and where my friends are." "What's what?" repeated one of the buccaneers in a deep growl. "Ah, he'd be a lucky one as knows that." "You'll perhaps batten down your hatches till you're spoke to, my friend," cried Silver truculently. to this speaker. And then in his first gracious tones, he replied to me. "Yesterday morning, Mr. Hawkins," said he, "in the dog watch, down came Dr. Livesey with a flag of truce. Says he, 'Captain Silver, you're sold out. Ship's gone.' Well, maybe we'd been taking a glass and a song to help it round. I won't say no. Leastways, none of us had looked out. We looked out, and by thunder, the whole ship was gone. I never seen a pack of fools look fishier, and you may lay to that if I tells you that looked the fishiest. Well, says the doctor, let's bargain. We bargained, him and I, and here we are. Stores, brandy, blockhouse, the firewood you was thoughtful enough to cut, and in a manner of speaking the whole blessed boat from Cross Trees to Kelson. As for them, they're trucked. I don't know where's they are." He drew again quietly at his pipe. "And lest you should take it into your head of yours," he went on, "you was included in the treaty. Here's the last word that was said. 'How many are you?' says I, 'to leave?' 4, says he, 4, and one of us wounded. As for the boy, I don't know where he has confound him, says he, nor I don't much care. We're about sick of him." Those were his words. "Is that all?" I asked. "Well, that's all that you're to hear, my son," returned Silver. "And now am I to choose?" "And now you are to choose, and you may lay to that," said Silver. "Well," said I am not such a fool, but I know pretty well what I have to look for. Let the worst come to it, it's little I care. I've seen too many die since I fell in with you. But there's a thing or two I have to tell you," I said, and by this time I was quite excited. "And the first is this. Here you are in a bad way. Ship lost, treasure lost, men lost, your whole business gone to wreck, and if you want to know who did it, it was I. I was in the apple barrel that night we sighted land, and I heard you, John, and you, Johnson, and Mr. Hans, who is now at the bottom of the sea, and told every word you said before the hour was out. And as for the schooner, it was I who cut her cable, and it was I that killed the men you had aboard of her, and it was I who thought her where you'll never see her more, not one of you. The laugh on my side. I've had the top of this business from the first. I no more fear you than I fear a fly. Kill me if you please, or spare me. But one thing I'll say, and no more, if you spare me. Bygones are bygones, and you fellows are in court for piracy. I'll save you all I can. It is for you to choose. Kill another and do yourselves no good, or spare me and keep a witness to save you from the gallows." I stopped, for I tell you I was out of breath, and to my wonder not a man of them moved, but all sat staring at me like as many sheep. And while they were still staring, I broke out again. "And now, Mr. Silver," I said, "I believe you're the best man here, and if things go to the worst, I'll take it kind of you to let the doctor know the way I took it." "I'll bear it in mind," said Silver with an accent so curious that I could not for the life of me decide whether he were laughing at my request or had been favorably affected by my courage. "I'll put one to that," cried the old mahogany-faced seaman, Morgan by name, who I had seen in Long John's public house upon the quays of Bristol. "It was him that knowed Black Dog." "Well, and see here," added the sea cook, "I'll put another again to that, by thunder, for it was this same boy way that faked the chart from Billy Bones. First and last we've split upon Jim Hawkins." "Then here goes," said Morgan with an oath, and he sprang up, drawing his knife as if he had been 20. "Avast there!" cried Silver. "Who are you, Tom Morgan? Maybe you thought you was captain here, perhaps, by the powers, but I'll teach you better. Cross me, and you'll go where many a good man's gone before you, first and last, these 30 years back. Some to the yard arm, shiver me timbers, and some by the board, and all to feed the fishes. There's never a man looked at me between the eyes and seen a good day afterwards, Tom Morgan, you may lay to that." Morgan paused, but a hoarse murmur rose from the others. "Tom's right," said one. "I stood hazing long enough from one," added another. "I'll be hanged if I'm being hazed by you, John Silver." "Did any of you gentlemen want to have it out with me?" roared Silver, bended far forward from his position on the keg, with his pipe still glowing in his right hand. "Put a name on what you're at. You ain't dumb, I reckon. Him that wants shall get it. Have I lived this many years, and a son of a rum punch cock his hand athwart my horse at the latter end of it? You know the way. You're old gentleman of fortune by your account. Well, I'm ready. Take a cutlass, him that dares, and I'll see the colour of his insides, crutch and all, before that pipe's empty." Not a man stirred, not a man answered. "That's your sort, is it?" he added, returning his pipe to his mouth. "Well, you're a queer lot to look at anyway. Not much worth fight, you ain't. Perhaps you can understand King George's English. I'm captain here by election. I'm captain here 'cause I'm the best man by a long sea mile. You won't fight as gentlemen of fortune should, then by thunder you'll obey, and you may lay to it. I like that boy now. I never seen a better boy than that. He's more a man than any pair of rats for you in this here house. What I say is this, let me see him that'll lay a hand on him. That's what I say, and you may lay to it." There was a long pause after this. I stood straight up against the wall, my heart still going like a sledgehammer, but with a ray of hope now shining in my bosom. Silver leant back against the wall, his arms crossed, his pipe in the corner of his mouth, as calm as though he had been in church. Yet his eye kept wandering furtively, as he kept the tail of it, on his unruly followers. They, on their part, drew gradually together towards the far end of the blockhouse, and the low hiss of their whispering sounded in my ear continuously like a stream. One after another they would look up, and the red light of the torch would fall for a second on their nervous faces, but it was not towards me, it was towards Silver that they turned their eyes. "You seem to have a lot to say," remarked Silver, spitting far into the air. "Pipe up and let me hear it, or lay to." "Ax your pardon, sir," returned one of the men. "You're pretty free with some of the rules. Maybe you'll kindly keep an eye upon the rest. This crew's dissatisfied. This crew don't value being a marlinspike. This crew has its rights like other crews. I'll make so free as that. And by your own rules, I take it we can talk together. I ask your pardon, sir, for acknowledging you for being captain all this present, but I'm doing my right and steps outside for a council." And with an elaborate sea salute, this fellow, a long, ill-looking, yellow-eyed man of 35, stepped quickly towards the door and disappeared out of the house. One after another, the rest followed his example, each making a salute as he passed, each adding some apology. "According to the rules," said one. "For Castle Consul," said Morgan. And so with one remark or another, all marched out and left Silver and me alone with the torch. The sea cook instantly removed his pipe. "Now, look you here, Jim Hawkins," he said in a steady whisper that was no more than audible. "You're within half a plank of death, and what's a long sight worse of torture, they're going to throw me off, but you mark, I stand by you through thick and thin. I didn't mean to. No, not till you spoke up. I was about desperate to lose that much blood and be hanged into the bargain, but I see you was the right sort. I says to myself, you stand by Hawkins, John, and Hawkins will stand by you. You're his last card, and by the living thunder, John, he's yours. Back to back, says I. You save your witness, and he'll save your neck." I began dimly to understand. "You mean all's lost?" I asked. "Aye, by gum, I do," he answered. "Ship's gone, neck gone, that's the size of it. Once I looked into that bay, Jim Hawkins had seen no schooner. Well, I'm tough, but I gave out. As for the lot and their counsel, mark me, they're outright fools and cowards. I'll save your life, so be as I can from them. But see here, Jim, tit for tat, you saved Long John from swinging." I was bewildered. It seemed the thing so hopeless he was asking, he, the old buccaneer, the ringleader, throughout. "What I can't do, that I'll do," I said. "It's a bargain," cried Long John. "You speak plucky, and by thunder I've a chance." He hobbled to the torch where it stood prone among the firewood, and took a fresh light to his pipe. "Understand me, Jim," he said, returning. "I've a head on my shoulders, I have. I'm on Squire's side now. I know you've got that ship safe somewheres. How you done it, I don't know, but safe it is. I guess Hans, old O'Brien, turned soft. I never much believed in neither of them. Now you mark me, I ask no questions or I won't let others. I know when a game's up, I do, and I know a lad that's staunch. Ah, you that's young, you and me might have done a power of good together." He drew some cognac from the cask into a tin cannikin. "Will you taste my spate?" he asked. And when I had refused, "Well, I'll take a dram myself, Jim," said he. "I need a conquer, for there's trouble on hand. And talking of trouble, why did that doctor give me the card, Jim?" My face expressed a wonder so unaffected that he saw the needlessness of further questions. "Ah, well, he did, though," said he. "And there's something under that, no doubt. Something surely under that, Jim, bad or good." And he took another swallow of the brandy, shaking his great fair head like a man who looks forward to the worst. Chapter 29. The Black Spot Again. The council of buccaneers had lasted some time when one of them re-entered the house, and with a repetition of the same salute, which had in my eyes an ironical air, begged for a moment's loan of the torch. Silver briefly agreed, and this emissary retired again, leaving us together in the dark. "There's a breeze coming, Jim," said Silver, who had by this time adopted quite a friendly and familiar tone. I turned to the loophole nearest me and looked out. The embers of the great fire had so far burned themselves out and now glowed so low and duskily that I understood why these conspirators desired a torch. About halfway down the slope to the stockade they were collected in a group. One held the light, another was on his knees in their midst, and I saw the blade of an open knife shine in his hand with varying colors of the moon and torchlight. The rest were all somewhat stooping, as though watching the maneuvers of this last. I could could just make out that he had a book as well as a knife in his hand, and was still wondering how anything so incongruous had come in their possession when the kneeling figure rose once more to his feet. The whole party began to move together towards the house. "Here they come," said I, and I returned to my former position, for it seemed beneath my dignity that they should find me watching them. "Well, let 'em come, lad, let 'em come," said Silver cheerily. "I've still a shot at my locker." The door opened, and the 5 men standing huddled together just inside pushed one of their number forward. In any other circumstances, it would have been comical to see his slow advance, hesitating as he set down each foot, but holding his closed right hand in front of him. "Step up, lad," cried Silver. "I won't eat you. Hand it over, lubber, you. I know the rules, I do. I won't hurt a temptation." Thus encouraged, the buccaneer stepped forward more briskly, having passed something to Silver from hand to hand, slipped yet more smartly back to his companions. The sea cook looked at what had been given him. "Ugh, the black spot. I thought so," he observed. "Where might you have got the paper? Hi, hello, look here now. This ain't lucky. You've gone and cut this out of a Bible. What fool's cut a Bible?" "Ah, there," said Morgan. "There, what did I say? No good'll come of that, I said." "Well, you've about fixed it now along you," continued Silver. "You're all swing now, I reckon. What soft-headed lubber had a Bible?" "It was Dick," said one. "Dick, was it? Then Dick can get to prayers," said Silver. "He's seen his slice of luck, has Dick, and you may lay to that." But here the long man with the yellow eyes struck in. "Belay that talk, John Silver," he said. "This crew has tipped you the black spot in full council as if duty-bound. Just you turn it over as if duty-bound and see what that's wrote there. Then you can talk." "Thank you, George," replied the sea cook. "You always was brisk for business, and has most my heart, George, as I'm pleased to see. Well, what is it, anyway?" "Ah, deposed. That's it, is it? Very pretty road, to be sure. Like print, I swear. Your hand all right, George? Why, you was getting quite a leading man in here. In this here crew, you'll be captain next, I should wonder. Just oblige me with that torch again, will you? This pipe's don't draw." "Come now," said George. "You don't fool this crew no more. You're a funny man by your account, but you're over now, and you'll maybe step down off that barrel and help food." "I thought you said you knowed the rules," returned Silver contemptuously. "Leastways, if you don't, I do. And I wait here, and I'm still your captain, mind, till you ounce with your grievances and I reply. In the meantime, your black spot ain't worth a biscuit. After that, we'll see." "Oh," replied George, "you don't be under no kind of apprehension. We're all square, we are. First, you've made a hash of this cruise. You'll be a bold man to say no to that. Second, let the enemy out of this here trap for nothing. Why did they want out? I don't know, but it's pretty plain they wanted it. Third, you would let us go at them upon the march. Oh, we see through you, John Silver. You want to play booty. That's what's wrong with you. And then fourth, there's this here boy." "Is that all?" asked Silver quietly. "Enough to," retorted George. "We'll all swing in sun-dry for your buckling." "Well, now look here, I'll answer these poor words. One after another I'll answer 'em. I made a harsh of this cruise, did I? Well, now, you all know what I wanted, and you all know if this had been done, that we'd a been aboard the Hispaniola this night, as ever was, every man of us alive, and fit and full of good plummed off, and this treasure in the hold of her, by thunder. Well, crossed me. Who forced my hand, as was the lawful captain? Who named me the black spot the day we landed and began this dance? Ah, it's a fine dance, I'm with you there. It looks mightily like a pipe in a rope's end, an execution done by London town windows. But who done it? Why, it was Anderson, and Hans, and you, George Mary. And you're the last of a more of that same meddling crew. And you have the Davy Jones and Sullivan Soap to up and stand for captain over me. You that sang with a lot of us. By the powers, but this tops the stiffest yarn to nothing. Silver paused, and I could see by the faces of George and his late comrades that these words had not been said in vain. That's for number one, cried the accused, wiping the sweat from his brow, for he had been talking with a vehemence that shook the house. Why, I give you my word, I'm sick to speak to you. You're neither sense nor memory, and I leave it to fancy where your mother's was that let you come to see it. See! Gentlemen of fortune, I reckon tailors is your trade. Go on, John, said Morgan. Speak up to the others. Ah, the others, returned John. They're a nice lot, ain't they? You say this cruise is bungled. Ah, by gum, if you could understand how bad it's bungled, you would see. We're that near the gibbet, and my neck's stiff with thinking on it. You've seen 'em, maybe, hanged in chains, birds about 'em, seen 'em biting them out as they go down with the tide. Who's that? Says one. That? Why, that's John Silver. I knowed him well, says another. And you can hear the chains jangle as you go about and reach for the other buoy. Now, that's about where we are. Every mother's son of us, thanks to him and Mr. Hans and Anderson and other ruination fools of you. And if you want to know about number 4 and that boy, why, shiver me timbers, isn't he a hostage? Are we a-going to waste a hostage? No, not us. He might be our last chance, and I shouldn't wonder. Kill that boy. No, not me, mates. And number 3, well, there's a deal to say to number 3. Maybe you don't count it nothing to have a real college doctor to see you every day. You, John, with your head broke, or you, George Mary, that had the ague shakes upon you not 6 hours agone, and has your eyes the colour of lemon peel to this same moment of the clock. And maybe perhaps you didn't know there was a concert coming either? But there is, and not so long till then, and we'll see who'll be glad to have a hostage when it comes to that. And as for number 2, and why I made my bargain, well, you came crawling on your knees to me. To make it on your knees you came. You was that thou art, and you'd have starved too if I hadn't. But that's a trifle. You look there, that's why. And he cast down upon the floor of a paper that I instantly recognized, none other than the chart on yellow paper with 3 red crosses that I had found in the oilcloth at the bottom of the captain's chest. Why the doctor had given it to him was more than I could fancy. But if it were inexplicable to me, the appearance of the chart was incredible to the surviving mutineers. They leapt upon it like cats upon a mouse. It went from hand to hand, one tearing it from another, and by the oaths and the cries and the childish laughter with which they accompanied their examination, you would have thought not only they were fingering the very gold, but were at sea with it besides in safety. Yeah, said one, that's Flint, sure enough, J.F. and a score below with a clubfish to it, so he done ever. Mighty pretty, said George, but how are we to get away with it, and us no ship? Silver suddenly sprang up and supporting himself with a hand against the wall. Now I give you warning, George, he cried. One more word of your sauce and I'll call you down, and for you. How? Why, how do I know? You had hoped to tell me that. You and the rest that lost me my schooner with your interference burn you. But not you, you can't. You ain't got the invention of a cockroach. But civil you can speak, and shall George marry, you may lay to that. That's fair now, said the old man, Morgan. Fair? I reckon so, said the sea cook. You lost the ship. I found the treasure. Who's the better man at that? And now I resign, by thunder. Elect whom you please to be your captain. Now I'm done with it. Sorry about the delay, just getting some music up again. It had just come to an end by the time I was finishing the break. I just need to find where I left off and we'll continue. Finish up the last of it, eh? Or last of the chapter for the night. Sorry about that. Connection is a little rocky at the moment again. Barbecue forever! Barbecue for Captain! So that's the tune, is it? Cried the cook. George, I reckon you'll have to wait another turn, friend. And lucky for you, as I'm not a revengeful man. But that was never my way, and now, shipmates, this black spot. 'Tain't much good now, is it? Dick's crossed his luck and spoiled his Bible, and that's about all. It'll do to kiss the book on still, won't it? Growled Dick, who was evidently uneasy at the curse he had brought upon himself. A Bible with a bit of cut out, returned Silver derisively. Not it. It don't bind no more'n a ballad book. Don't it, though? Cried Dick with a sort of joy. Well, I reckon that's worth having, too. Here, Jim, here's a curiosity for you, said Silver, and he tossed me the paper. It was around about the size of a crown piece. One side was blank, for it had been the last leaf. The other contained a verse or two of Revelation. These words, among the rest, which struck sharply home upon my mind, "Without are dogs and murderers." The printed side had been blackened with a wood ash, which already had begun to come off and soil my fingers. On the blank side had been written with the same material the one word "deposed." I have that curiosity beside me at this moment, but not a trace of writing now remains beyond a single scratch, such as a man might make with his thumbnail. That was the end of the night's business. Soon after, with a drink all around, we lay down to sleep, and the outside of Silver's vengeance was to put George Merry up for sentinel and threaten him with death if he should prove unfaithful. It was long ere I could close an eye, and heaven knows I had matter enough for thought in the man whom I had slain that afternoon, in my own most perilous position, and above all, in the remarkable game that I saw Silver now engaged upon, keeping the mutineers together with one hand, and grasping with the other after every means possible and impossible to make his peace and save his miserable life. He himself slept peacefully and snored aloud, yet my heart was sore for him, wicked as he was, to think on the dark perils that environed and the shameful gibbet that awaited him. Chapter 30. On parole. I was wakened, indeed. We were all wakened, for I could see even the sentinel shake himself together from where he had fallen against the doorpost, by a clear, hearty voice hailing us from the margin of the wood. "Blockhouse ahoy!" he cried. "Here's the doctor." And the doctor it was. Although I was glad to hear the sound, yet my gladness was not without admixture. I remembered with confusion my insubordinate and stealthy conduct, and when I saw where it had brought me, among what companions and surrounded by what dangers, I felt ashamed to look him in the face. He must have risen in the dark, for the day had hardly come, and when I lay to a loophole and looked out, I saw him standing like Silver once before, up to the mid-leg, in a creeping vapor. "You, doctor, top of the morning to you, sir," cried Silver, broad awake and beaming with good nature in a moment. "Bright and early, to be sure, and it's the early bird, as the saying goes, that gets the rations. George, shake up your temper, son, and help Dr. Livesey over the ship's side. All a-doing well your patience was, all well and merry." So he pattered on, standing on the hilltop with his crutch under his elbow, and one hand upon the side of the log house, quite the old John in voice, manner, and expression. "We've quite a surprise for you, too, sir," he continued. "We've a little stranger here, a new boarder and lodger, sir, and looking fit and taut as a fiddle. Slept like a supercargo, he did, right alongside of John. Stem to stem he was all night." Dr. Livesey was by this time across the stockade and pretty near the cook, and I could hear the alteration in his voice as he said, "Not Jim?" "The very same Jim as ever was," said Silver. The doctor stopped outright, although he did not speak. It was some seconds before he seemed able to move on. "Well, well," he said at last, "duty first and pleasure afterwards, as you might have said yourself, Silver. Let us overhaul these patients of yours." A moment afterwards he had entered the blockhouse and with one grim nod to me he proceeded with his work among the sick. He seemed under no apprehension, though he must have known that his life among these treacherous demons depended on a hair, and he rattled on to his patients as if he were paying an ordinary professional visit in a quiet English family. His manner, I suppose, reacted on the men, for they behaved to him as if nothing had occurred, as if he were still ship's doctor and they still faithful hands before the mast. "You're doing well, my friend," he said to the fellow with the bandaged head, "and if ever any person had a close shave it was you. Your head must be as hard as iron. Well, George, how goes it? You're a pretty colour, certainly. Why, your liver man is upside down. Did you take that medicine? Did he take that medicine, then?" "Aye, aye, sir, he took it, sure enough," returned Morgan. "Because, you see, since I am mutineer's doctor, or prison doctor, as I prefer to call it," says Dr. Livesey in his pleasantest way, "I make it a point of honour not to lose a man for King George, God bless him, at the gallows." The rogues looked at each other, but swallowed the home thrust in silence. "Dick don't feel well, sir," said one. "Don't he?" replied the doctor. "Well, step up here, Dick, and let me see your tongue." "No, I should be surprised if he did. The man's tongue is fit to frighten the French. Another fever." "Ah, there," said Morgan. "That comes of spilling Bibles. That comes, as you call it, of being errant asses," reported the doctor, "and not having sense enough to know honest air from poison, and the dry land from a vile, pestiferous slough. I think it most probable, though of course it's only an opinion, that you all have the deuce to pay before you get that malaria out of your systems. Camping up bog, would you, Silver? I'm surprised at you. You're less of a fool than many take you all around, but you don't appear to me to have the rudiments of a notion of the rules of health. Well," he added, after he had dosed them round, and they had taken his prescriptions with really laughable humility, more like charity school children than blood-guilty mutineers and pirates. "Well, that's done for today, and now I should wish to have a talk with that boy, please." Then he nodded his head in my direction carelessly. George Barry was at the door, spitting and spluttering over some bad-tasted medicine, but at the first word of the doctor's proposal he swung round with a deep flush and cried, "No!" and swore. Silver struck the barrel with his open hand. "Silence!" he roared, and looked about him positively like a lion. "Doctor," he went on in his usual tones, "I was a-thinking of that. Knowing as how you had a fancy with the boy, we're all humbly grateful for your kindness, and as you see, put faith in you and takes the drugs down like that much grog. I take it I've found a way as'll suit all. Hawkins, will you give me your word of honour as a young gentleman, for a young gentleman you are, although poor-born, your word of honour not to slip your cable?" I readily gave the pledge required. "Then, doctor," said Silver, "you just step outside of that stockade, and once you're there, I'll bring the boy down on the inside, and I reckon you can yard through the spars. Good day to you, sir, and all our duties to the squire and Captain Smollett." The explosion of disapproval which nothing but Silver's black looks had restrained broke out immediately. The moment the doctor had left the house, Silver was roundly accused of playing double, of trying to make a separate peace for himself, of sacrificing the interests of his accomplices and victims, and, in one word, of the identical exact thing that he was doing. It seemed to me so obvious in this case that I could not imagine how he was to turn their anger, but he was twice the man the rest were, and his last night's victory had given him a huge preponderance on their minds. He called them all the fools in boots you can imagine, said it was necessary I should talk to the doctor, fluttered the chart in their faces, asked them if they could afford to break the treaty the very day they were bound to shut. "No, by thunder," he cried. "It's us must break the treaty when the time comes, and until then I'll govern that doctor if I have to oil his boots with brandy." And then he bade them to get the fire lit and stalked out upon his crutch, with his hand on my shoulder, leaving them in a disarray and silenced by his volubility rather than convinced. "Slow, lad, slow," he said. "They might run upon us in a twinkle of an eye if we was seen to hurry." Very deliberately then did we advance across the sand where the doctor awaited us on the other side of the stockade, and as soon as we were within easy speaking distance, Silver stopped. "You'll make a note of this here also, doctor," says he, "and the boy'll tell you how I saved his life, and were deposed for it too, and you may lay to that. Doctor, when a man's steering as near the wind as me, blind Chip Farthing with the last breath of his body like, you wouldn't think it too much mayhap to give him one good word. You please bear in mind it's not my life only now, it's that boy's into the bargain, and you'll speak me fair, doctor, and give me a bit of hope to go on for the sake of mercy." Silver was a changed man once he was out there and had his back to his friends at the blockhouse. His cheeks seemed to have fallen in, his voice trembled. Never was a soul more dead in earnest. "Why, John, you're not afraid?" asked Dr. Livesey. "Doctor, I'm no coward. No, not I, not so much." And he snapped his fingers. "If I was, I wouldn't say it, but I'll own up verily. I've the shakes upon me for the bellows. You're a good man, and a true. I never seen a better man, and you'll not forget what I've done good, not any more than you'll forget the bad I know. And I step aside, see here, and leave you and Jim alone. And you put that down for me too, for it's a long stretch as that." So saying, he stepped back and a little way till he was out of earshot, and there sat down upon a tree stump and began to whistle, spinning round now and again upon his seat, so as to command a sight sometimes of me and the doctor, sometimes of his unruly ruffians as they went to and fro in the sand between the fire, which they were busy rekindling, and the house from which they brought forth pork and bread to make breakfast. "So, Jim," said the doctor sadly, "here you are. As you have brewed, so shall you drink, my boy. Heaven knows I cannot find it in my heart to blame you, but this much I will say, be it kind or unkind. When Captain Smollett was well, you dared not have gone off, and when he was ill, you couldn't help it. By George, it was downright cowardly." I will own that I here began to weep. "Doctor," I said, "you might spare me. I have blamed myself enough. My life's forfeit anyway, and I should have been dead by now if Silver hadn't stooped for me. And, doctor, believe this, I can die, and I dare say I deserve it, but what I fear is torture. If they come to torture me, Jim, the doctor interrupted, and his voice was quite changed. Jim, I can't have this. Whip over and we'll run for it. Doctor, said I passed my word. I know, he cried. We can't help that, Jim, now. I'll take it on my shoulders, hold this blame and shame, my boy, but stay here. I cannot let you. Jump. We'll jump and you're out, and we'll run for it like antelopes. No, I replied. You know right well I wouldn't do the thing yourself. Neither you nor Squire nor Captain, and no more will I. Silver trusted me. I passed my word, and I go. But, Doctor, you did not let me finish. If they don't come to torture me, I might let slip a word of where the ship is, for I got the ship part by luck and part by risking. She lies in North Inlet, on the southern beach, just below high water. At half-tide she must be high and dry. The ship! Exclaimed the doctor. Rapidly I described my adventures to him, and he heard me out in silence. There is a kind of fate in this, he observed when I had done. Every step, it's you that saves our lives. And do you suppose by any chance that we are going to let you lose yours? That would be a poor return, my boy. You found out the plot. You found Ben Gunn. The best deed that ever you did, or will do, that you live to 90. Oh, by Jupiter! And talking of Ben Gunn, why, this is the mischief in person. Silver, he cried. Silver, I'll give you a piece of advice. He continued as the cook drew near again. Don't you be in any great hurry after that treasure. Why, sir? Why, sir, I do my possible that which that ain't, said Silver. I can only ask in your pardon, save my life and the boys by seeking for that treasure. And you may lay to that. Well, Silver, replied the doctor, if that is so, I'll go one step further. Look out for squalls when you find it. Sir, said Silver, as between man and man, that's too much and too little. What you're after, why you left the blockhouse, why you've given me that there chart, I don't know now, do I? And yet I done your bidding with my eyes shut, and never said, and never a word of hope. But no, this here's too much. If you won't tell me what you mean plain out, just say so, and I'll leave the helm. No, said the doctor musingly, I've no right to say more. It's not my secret, you see, Silver, or I give you my word I'd tell you. But I'll go as far with you as I dare go, and a step beyond, for I'll have my wig sorted by the captain, or I'm mistaken. And first I'll give you a bit of hope, Silver. If we both get alive out of this wolf trap, I'll do my best to save you short of perjury. Silver's face was radiant. You couldn't say more, I'm sure, sir. Not if you was my mother, he cried. Well, that's my first concession, added the doctor. My second is a piece of advice. Keep the boy close beside you, and when you need help, halloo. I'm off to seek it for you, and that itself will show you if I speak at random. Goodbye, Jim. And Dr. Livesey shook hands with me through the stockade, nodded to Silver, and set off at a brisk pace into the wood. Chapter 31. The Treasure Hunt. Flint's Wonder. Jim, said Silver when we were alone, if I saved your life, you saved mine, and I'll not forget it. I seen the doctor waving you to run for it. With the tail of my eye I did, and I seen you say no, as plain as hearing. Jim, that's one to you. This is the first glint of hope I have since the attack failed, and I owe it to you. And now, Jim, we'd go in for this here treasure hunting, with sealed orders too, and I don't like it. And you and me must stick close back to back like. That won't save our necks in spite of fate and fortune. Just then a man hailed us from the fire that breakfast was ready, and we were soon seated here and there about the sand for biscuit and fried junk. They had lit a fire fit to roast an ox, and it was now grown so hot that they could only approach it from the windward, and even then not without precaution. In the same wasteful spirit, they had cooked, I suppose, 3 times more than we could eat. One of them, with an empty laugh, threw what was left into the fire, which blazed and roared again over this unusual fuel. I never in my life saw men so careless of the morrow. Hand-to-mouth is the only word that can describe their way of doing, and what with wasted food and sleeping sentries, though they were cold enough for a brush and be done with it, I could see their entire unfitness for anything like a prolonged campaign. Even Silver, eating away with Captain Flint upon his shoulder, had not a word of blame for their recklessness, and this the more surprised me, for I thought he had never shown himself so cunning as he did then. "Aye, mates," said he, "it's lucky you have barbecued them for you with this here head. I got what I wanted, I did. Sure enough, they have the ship. Where they have it, I don't know yet, but once we hit the treasure, we'll have to jump about and find out. And then, mates, us that has the boats, I reckon, has the upper hand." Thus he kept running on with his mouth full of the hot bacon. Thus he restored their hope and confidence, and I, more than his suspect, repaired his own at the same time. "As for the hostage," he continued, "that's his lost dog, I guess, with them he loves so dear. I got my piece of news and thanking to him for that. But it's over and done. I'll take him in a line when we go treasure hunting, but we'll keep him like so much gold in case of accidents we work, and in the meantime, once we got the ship and the treasure both and off to sea like jolly companions, why then we'll talk Mr. Hopkins over, we will, and we'll give him his share, to be sure, for all his kindness." It was no wonder the men were in a good humor now. For my part, I was horribly cast down. Should the scheme he had now sketched prove feasible, Silver, already double a traitor, would not hesitate to adopt it. He had still a foot in either camp, and there was no doubt he would prefer wealth and freedom, with the pirates, to a bare escape from hanging, which was the best he had to hope on our side. Nay, and even if things so fell out that he was forced to keep his faith with Dr. Livesey, even then what danger lay before us? What a moment that would be when the suspicions of his followers turned to certainty, and he and I should have to fight for dear life, he a cripple and I a boy, against 5 strong and active seamen. Add to this double apprehension the mystery that still hung over the behavior of my friends, their unexplained desertion of the stockade, their inexplicable cession of the chart, or harder still to understand, the doctor's last warning to Silver: "Look out for squalls when you find it," and you will readily believe how little taste I found in my breakfast, and with how uneasy a heart I set forth behind my captors on the quest for treasure. We're about to come up on the last minute. I'm going to go ahead and stop there. Save the spot. We are at 80%. Finished with the book. So likely the next stream we will probably finish it. Just gonna make a quick adjustment to the story graph to make sure that I have it correct. You can find the link to the story graph in my About section. If you want to follow, or if you want to befriend me on Storygraph, feel free to do so. No pressure, of course. But I do like to share with others where we are in our journey. All right. I considered for a little bit maybe playing something, a little bit of ASMR gaming, if you will, but seeing as I don't really have much in the way of people watching at the moment, I'm gonna go ahead and be done for the night. Find someone to raid. For anybody who's watching this VOD after the fact, I want to say thank you. I hope that you will drop a follow or a sub if you can. And if you're watching this on YouTube, if you could like and subscribe, maybe give it a thumbs up, comment and share. Anything to help appease the gods of the algorithm. Remember, of course, to take any medication you maybe haven't taken yet. Have a good long sip of water. If you have the ability to, go ahead and go outside and take a deep breath. Get a little bit of sun. And if you have a furry loved one, I hope that you'll give them a kiss on the forehead from me. I hope to see you come next time. I will be live tomorrow, Monday, the 20th of August, for the daytime stream. We will be continuing Among the Gnomes by Franz Hartmann. Maybe we'll also play a little more game as well. I haven't decided yet. Or do some co-working either way. Anyway, thanks once again for tuning in. I hope you sleep well, dream sweet. I hope to see you again next time. Take care.